Well, welcome to this PBN interview. I'm here with the prospective Senator Hull, who's running in the Lincoln Senate race. It's good to have you on this program.
It's good to be here.
Okay. So you're running. So just give us a brief overview of why you're running.
Because quite clearly, Lincoln and the United States need change. I wasn't expecting to be appointed as a senator. It came out of the blue. I was, coming to the end of a stint in cabinet again, and then in the White House working as an SA. I was looking towards having a nice bit of time off, but the governor came and asked me to fill a seat, and I did. And since then, I've seen that there's a lot that needs changing. And from being in government, from being in the Senate, and from talking to everyday citizens, I've come to realize that when I say there's a lot, there's a lot. I think I'm quite driven, and you'll see this in my platform that'll be released later this week. I'm quite driven by a few things in particular. The one big one is reform. The DOJ needs to change. We need to have new rules around what powers the president has and how they're exercised. We need gun reform at both state and federal level, particularly after the dreadful shooting in Lincoln earlier this month.
Mm-hmm.
It's there's a lot to be driven by at the moment, and I'm driven by the people of Lincoln and their voice.
Okay. So let's talk about the TC administration recently. They
Mm-hmm.
obviously unseated the incumbent Alexa Rosen in
They
the
did.
last election. What are your thoughts on how that administration has carried out business so far?
Well, they've done the best they can. I think that I I'm refreshed by the president's new take on how to govern. He's been a lot more open with his administration than previous ones. He's been willing to allow newer people, fresher faces in, which is a brave but needed step. He's, he opened up the cabinet to everybody on appointment, to request to apply, and I think that was a very good idea, a very brave idea. I may disagree with some of his appointments. Some of them were too unqualified in my view, but it's a step in the right direction, and I think future administrations need to pick up on that. I think that he's been very good at doing the job. I may disagree with his policies, I may disagree with what he does, but I think in actually doing the job, I think he's good at it. I think he's done a good job.
Okay. Speaking about policies, arguably the biggest policy that an administration can put forward is the budget. There's been a lot of coverage of the budget. It will produce a projected surplus thanks to taxes on things such as e-cigarettes and also maintaining the carbon tax, which we had Representative Cruz on the show earlier, who said that he wanted to repeal this carbon tax. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, clearly, Representative Cruz doesn't care about the environment or the world we live in. I think the carbon tax is a needed and good step to help move to a low carbon future, which is ultimately what we need to do. One of my first pieces of legislation was to increase the amount of nuclear power stations in order to move away from dirtier power. Really, we need to be looking more at green policy, at carbon taxes possibly, or other forms of punitive tax in order to help push the population into a greener future. And honestly, if it's done the right way, people can gain money through it. We can become more prosperous if we invest the money we gain from the carbon taxes into businesses and into industries that produce green energy or produce parts for electric cars or for better insulated homes. That's a really good boon to the economy, especially if the government's putting in a good bit of money.
So if we look at the carbon tax, it produces 31 billion per bi-monthly
Yeah.
period, which I'm not a mathematician, but that's around 180 billion per year, which can definitely be spent on a wide range of
Oh,
environmental
definitely.
programs.
Mhm. No, I
So,
completely agree. And I think that Congress and members of Congress, and part of that's my job, should be putting forward more green programs um, uh, and highlighting more areas to put that funding.
yeah,
I think that presidents need to stick to their manifesto promises, to their platform promises, and one of the president's platform promises was a balanced budget. Now, we've got something similar to that here. We've got a surplus, which he's keeping his promises, which is good. I do worry though that with the more defense spending, that he might not be able to balance that budget. And I think that possibly we may need more taxes.
yeah. So speaking on defence spending, obviously there was HR 11
Hmm.
proposed by Representative Mark, I believe. So that bill would appropriate 159 billion to the military for developments in for, for the procurement of vehicles and such, which would increase the military budget by to around over 700 billion, which is the highest that it's been in quite some time. What's your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
I've spoken at length in the past about foreign policy, and I think this plays into that. I've spoken about the fact that we're moving away from the single pole world that we've lived in for the last 30 years. Like it or not, the US is not top dog anymore. There are competitors and pretty similar sized competitors growing. But we've had our spats, we've had skirmishes with China, we've had a war, well, may or may not have had a war in Ukraine. We are moving to this multipolar world, and in that world, we need to up our defense spending and modernize the military as a first port of call. Alongside that, we need to be building alliances and becoming much more present on the world stage. To fall back on the world stage now would be admitting defeat and surrendering our way of life to those who do us harm, and giving up on democracy globally is what it would be. We're a beacon of liberty. We are a beacon of democracy, and our job is to spread that democracy and to, where it does exist, to defend it. And we need to really reassert our position in that. And the Rosen administration, followed by the TC administration, actually have done a good job in that, in pushing IPTO.
Yeah. So for those who may not be aware, can you explain what IPTO is?
IPTO is the Indo-Pacific Treaty Organization. It is one of the largest geopolitical shifts we have seen in at least the last decade, if not longer. It's a new alliance stringing together a bunch of allies in the Pacific region. Notably, off the top of my head, South Korea, Japan, and Australia. There may be more, I can't remember. It does look to expand to further members. I've had discussions with the Deputy Secretary of State regarding possibly talking to India and possibly talking to other countries in the region. We're looking for this to be something similar to NATO in Europe, how it has prolonged peace within its members. We want a counterbalance to China in the same way we have a counterbalance to Russia. And that's what this achieves.
Okay. So there was also a bill proposed that would authorise a military force, which, as we've seen, the president has enacted a blockade of Nicaraguan/Chinese ships that are suspected to carry intercontinental ballistic missiles, as well as potential satellite imagery that has shown that Nicaragua is building nuclear silos. This has been confirmed by both the BBC and the TC administration in a speech on the House floor. So we may be heading to one of the gravest, most stressful situations since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. So, what are your thoughts on how the administration has currently handled it, and what would you recommend to them that they do differently to ensure that we do not end up in a disastrous nuclear war?
I mean, I'll start off with my recommendation to the TC administration because I think that's the most important thing here. It is to pursue all diplomatic routes possible. Talk to the UN Security Council, push resolutions there, go into the UN General Assembly, push resolutions there calling for China not to place these weapons so close to the US. At the same time, I'd be making approaches to China to try and figure out a treaty or some kind of agreement where we say that, you know, they can't put nuclear weapons here and we won't put nuclear weapons there. I think that is a fair agreement if we can get it. I think that moving the military to form a blockade is the right decision. It was the right decision back in the 60s. It's the right decision now. But that cannot be on its own. Must have negotiation. You must approach the Chinese and various other allies in the UN Security Council and directly. That is the main thing here.
So you said that they should pursue diplomatic measures. Is on Twitter the president stated that we could care less about the condemnation from a third world country. Those last three words in capitals. Do you think this could only further inflame the situation?
Oh, 100%. I think that issues like this are of the utmost seriousness, and unserious responses don't get us anywhere. In fact, they make the situation worse. We don't want to be insulting China in our speech. We want to be opening a door and allowing them an off-ramp, allowing them a way out of this, allowing them an opportunity for their ships to turn around and go back home with at least a little bit of dignity. Because if we don't give them that off-ramp, I mean, if we don't allow them that opportunity, then the only place it can go is up. The only place it can go is escalation. And that's not what we want. We do not want a shooting war off the coast of Central America.
Okay. So let's just go back to your push for DOJ reform, which you mentioned in the town hall. Obviously, you've been a pretty big proponent of that since the January election, where there was potential DOJ interference, and you submitted a government reform recommendation, which ultimately led to the creation of a committee, a presidential task force, I believe, by President Freeze, which is me. So, what would you further do in regards to DOJ independence and non-partisanship?
I think that it needs to be split off from the executive branch in some way. There needs to be some form of, and I'll get on to how we figure this out later on, but there needs to be some form of true independence for the DOJ. And I think part of that is term limits for and term lengths for the appointees to running it. The DOJ needs to be split up. As another point, it's you've got the Attorney General who holds both responsibility for suing law, right, and representing the US in court, which is delegated to the Solicitor General, but that is part of his brief. But also is then prosecuting, and in many cases recently actively prosecuting cases against individuals. And this person's a political appointee and a member of the cabinet and in charge of various reforms when it comes to various reforms when it comes to criminal justice, right?
It also has national
It
security
feels
linked.
like three roles. It feels like three roles rolled up into one. It feels like you've got a kind of the equivalent of a British Home Secretary there, whose job is, law and order. You've got somebody equivalent to a British Attorney General, whose job is, being the government lawyer and suing uh, on behalf of the country, right? On behalf of the United States, suing law or defending that law if somebody else sues it. And then you've got the third bit, which is then prosecuting people. They need to be split up, particularly the criminal justice side. It should not have anything to do with the president.
So do you believe that the Attorney General should not be appointed by the President then?
I believe, right, I believe that the criminal role, the criminal justice role of the Attorney General should be split off from the Attorney General altogether. The Attorney General should remain a position in the cabinet, but it should only be as the head of, you know, for example, corrections, and post-conviction um, policy, and possibly as the government's lawyer when it comes to defending or suing civil legislation, and civil judicial review. They should not have a criminal role at all. I propose a completely new role to deal with the criminal stuff, a director of public prosecutions, a director of correction, whatever, but a new role divorced from the executive branch.
Okay. So, what can you just So you're running for the Senate for another term.
I am.
Your opponent is Mr. Jones, who's a very accomplished and experienced individual who's been in positions such as Speaker and also Governor of Lincoln. What do you believe you both have in common? And what do you believe are some key differences that might persuade voters to vote for you instead of the opponent?
I'll start with what we have in common. I think it's quite clear we both have a love for Lincoln. We both have a respect for government. We are both genuine and good people, and we do what we feel is best, but we disagree with what is best. um, Differences, obviously, policy,
Mm-hmm.
big differences there, particularly on firearms, and on various other areas.
Yeah.
I think that he's not in a party, and I'm a party man. I've been in the Democratic Party almost my entire political career, and the times that I haven't been, I've been either a Democrat in exile or an independent Democrat, or a judge. So I think there's a big difference there as he's an independent. And I obviously I think our views on the country differ.
Mm, obviously. So let's just talk about abortion. It's a topic that tends to come up quite regularly. Now, you've obviously had the president make statements on Twitter, but you've also had a bill that's been proposed in the Senate by Pickle Hersey that would essentially, I'll read out the goal: to protect a person's ability to determine whether to continue or end a pregnancy, and to protect a healthcare provider's ability to provide abortion services. Do you support this bill?
Yeah,
Okay.
simple as yes.
Do you care to
If
explain?
Republicans and conservatives will say it's not the government's place to interfere in people's lives, then you know this is the same thing. It's a government stepping in to interfere in a woman's choice. So you know conservative arguments go out the window, and I understand that they claim that via religious views or other that the fetus is alive, or that it's you know a, 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 an adult human, whatever you want to consider it.
Yeah.
Well, firstly, if these beliefs are founded on religious views, then they shouldn't um, they shouldn't inform policy. There's a whole reason why we have a separation of church and state, and we should not be enforcing religious views on a population. We should leave that up to the population. Secondly, and probably more importantly, it's the women's right to choose what's done to their body. And we should, nobody's saying abortion's a good thing. We should say to people that it's a grave choice, that it's a difficult choice, and recognize that and support people through that decision-making process. But once they've made that decision, I don't think it's the job of the state to step in to try and stop them from doing this, or criminalize it, or make it more difficult. We should support the decision of the individual.
Okay. Let's just touch a bit on the recent controversies in the Senate. There's obviously been the highly publicized battle. It's almost a battle between, well, ironically, a battle between CJ, Senator CJ, and it seems former Senator Battle, who he kind of held up the proceedings of the Senate by calling.
He was bullied out.
So you believe that he was bullied out of the Senate?
Oh yeah, I believe it. The the Progressive Caucus believe it. It's simply true. I mean, I said that I was going to move for a censure vote, and I still have full intention to do so. It's just the work of the state has to come first, and I don't have a mandate currently, and I don't feel it's right for me to put pieces of legislation forwards without a mandate. If I am re-elected, one of the first things I'll be doing is putting forward a censure of CG and of Connor Wolf for his inactivity.
Yeah, but there's also been Connor Wolf, who has also been generally inactive and has not voted a lot.
It's massive hypocrisy is what it is. They're willing to bully a former member of their caucus out, right? And claim it's because of inactivity. Really, it's not because of inactivity, because if it was due to inactivity, they'd get rid of Wolf as well. It's 100%. If
should be gone from the Senate, expelled.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't expel him. Personally, I wouldn't. I've not got a mandate. He does. I don't think it would be right for me if the vote did come up. I'd vote present. But
what if you did get a mandate in this election?
If I got a mandate in this election, then 100%, I'd move for the removal myself. He should not be there. He's claiming a salary. The people are paying him, and he's doing nothing. He's just reaping the benefits. And I'm genuinely surprised that the people of his state haven't tried to recall him. They should have.
It seems I did some minor misinformation there. Connor Wolf, I believe, is in the seat that's currently up, so he will not be.
No, he won't. He won't. Yeah.
Yes. So he can't be expelled, and
Mm-hmm.
he can only be
Well,
expelled.
I think
Senate closes.
I still feel that because you can censure former senators, and I do feel like and I will still move to censure him because he sat for an entire term, said nothing but present, and voted sparingly. I think I could probably count on one hand the number of times he's voted during this term. It's a benefit to us as progressives because it's one less vote against us. But I'd much rather have a Republican there voting against us, speaking against us, than somebody there who doesn't vote and doesn't speak.
Such as Mr. Former President Lemaire, for example.
Possibly.
Okay. So let's finish off with some quick-fire questions, which I'm on nonce on PBN did. So, do you support nuclear energy?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. Do you support the use of omnibus packages?
No. I think that the bills should be split up, that they should be single issue, that omnibus packages muddy the waters.
Biggest problem facing America today?
Gun crime.
Really? That's interesting.
Yes.
Can you expand on that?
Any other Western nation you look at does not have anywhere near the problem of gun violence we do. You look at even ones with similar levels of gun ownership don't have the same levels of gun violence we do. And I understand a lot of it's down to gang violence, but that's not an excuse. That's a call to action. If a lot of it's down to gang violence, then we should do something about gang violence. You know, but we're not. We're just funding police more and more and more and giving them more weapons, which just makes it worse. You need something. I don't know what, but you know, I will definitely be having conversations with congressional colleagues. We need something to try and get, decrease the gang violence. Somehow we've got to try and figure something out, decrease the gang violence. That's a big part of this. Then you've got the over the last 3 years, there has been a massive rollback in restrictions on firearms, and we've seen the result of those restrictions last month with the shooting in Lincoln. Shouldn't have happened. The person shouldn't have got that gun, and I won't say his name, but he shouldn't have got that gun.
This is also not the first university shooting this year in the state.
Exactly. It's not. Yeah. Not. Yeah. 100%. He shouldn't have got that gun. He had it illegally through loopholes that were opened up by Lincoln politicians rolling back firearms legislation. So really, the responsibility has to rest on the Lincoln State Legislature for rolling back that. And I'm been very noticed a lot that my opponent after the shooting in Lincoln, not a word on the matter. Me, myself, Hev, the governor, we've all come out together in favour of firearm reform. And it doesn't even need to be extreme firearm reform. Just putting ourselves back to the situation we were in a few years ago, back to there, would have stopped this. The police officer would have still been alive if we had just kept that legislation there.
So what would you
And instead, it's been rolled back, and they're dead.
So what would you say to people who are accusing you of politicizing this tragedy?
It has to be. Fundamentally, it has to be politicized. Every single time there is a shooting, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers, and nothing changes. Nothing changes because politicians are afraid to step into the fray. They're afraid to say, well, actually, I think some change is needed here. And they're afraid to push for that because then they get accused of politicizing the matter. Well, I'm sorry, but well, actually, I'm not sorry. When this many killings happen, it is a political matter. It has to be a political matter. It can't sit as an apolitical thing because people have died. People have died is why it has to be political.
Okay, so well, this won't be quick fire questions, but this turned into.
Yep.
I'll ask a few more. So, what's your strongest held belief?
That's a good idea. That's a good question. My strongest held belief. It's the belief that through the political process, things can only get better. Over time, we'll disagree about things in the short term. We might roll back things, but over time, things will get better. And it's our jobs as politicians to, keep it going.
In the words of Martin Luther King, I believe, things eventually bend towards justice, you would argue.
Yeah, I hadn't actually heard that quote before, but no, I completely agree.
Okay, so I'll ask a few more quick questions. Well, we've already established your thoughts on abortion, but do you believe healthcare is a fundamental right?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. You know, you can't come into this world without some level of healthcare for you and your mother, and you can't go out of this world. Well, I mean, you can go out of this world, but it's much more comfortable to go out of this world with that same healthcare. That we have a right to live our lives and live full lives, and you can only live a full life with healthcare. So yeah, I agree. It's definitely a right.
Okay, so let me just touch on the opposing. What are your thoughts on the other link of those? Because obviously you're running in a special election, but there's also the Class 2 seat, which is up between the incumbent Governor Claire Dawson. Sorry, Claire Dawson Lockhart. There we go. And current press secretary in the TC administration and former Governor Karl Marx. What are your thoughts on that race?
It's going to be it's going to be an explosive one, I think. Karl Marx is known for quite outlandish views and being quite good in, when asked questions. So I think that if they get into a debate, it's going to be a difficult battle. Obviously, I want the governor to win.
Do you believe that they can win?
I believe they can. I believe it's going to be very difficult, very very difficult. Marx is uh, a proven candidate, and I think it'd be very very difficult for the governor to win.
Right, final question. Well, it's kind of a question. Sum up your campaign message in 3 words.
Reform, reform, reform.
Okay, those are some good words to end on there. Reform. Thank you for your time, Mr. Hull, and
It's
good
okay.
luck on your campaign.
Thank you. It's nice being back on PBN.